Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in Palestine, in the Middle East, there is a little country and it's called Palestine. But if you look at a map, it won't say Palestine, it will say Israel. And that's because 100 years ago, after World War II, the UN got together after the catastrophes that were happening to Jewish people in Germany and all over Europe. They voted to have a country that's called Palestine, which is neighboring to Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. It's a very small country. To have it split up into two, one for Palestine, for the people that were originally living there, and Israel, which was going to be a new state dedicated to all of those Jewish people that will be immigrating outside of Europe due to all the catastrophes that were done to them and their families, and just the ethnic cleansing and the murder that was happening in World War II. This was voted on by the UN but rejected by the entire Middle East and every Arab country. It was also rejected by Palestinian citizens themselves and the Palestinian government. Nobody cared, though, because they were just seen as selfish for not wanting to have a two state, like their country to be split into two states. And so, because of that, uh, the UK and the US funded Israeli settlement into that area, and it was forced to be split into two. And what was happening is that the US and the UK were sending billions of dollars to Israeli people to essentially buy out lands in Palestine. So they would buy homes and lands and public spaces, and they split Palestinian people into two areas. One, which is on the right side of on the eastern side of the country, which is called the West Bank, and that's where Jerusalem is, which is seen as a very holy land for both Jewish people and Muslim people. And then on the bottom left, which is Gaza, and it's not a lot of land that's left for Palestinian people, but essentially because they were buying so much lands out, uh, Palestinian people were all forced to live in those areas or just leave the country. And because of that, Palestinian people are trying to get their land back, and for 100 years, and it has not been working. Uh, Mostly because Palestinian people are backed by Middle Eastern countries that are still also pretty poor. Some of them are considered third world countries still. They don't have a very Western technology or funding. While Israel is being backed by the US, the UK, most European countries, so just from the US, they receive billions of dollars a year and weapons and a lot of uh, assets to their military. So the fight is not a fair fight, obviously. It's basically a bunch of innocent Palestinian families and children being attacked by the entire West into Israeli government. And this has been happening for hundreds of years, and it's only being seen on the media now, but it has been happening for a very long time. And if you go to the Middle East, if you go to those neighboring countries, you will see Palestinian immigrants and refugees trying to live out their lives. And if you speak to any of them, they will tell you all about however many times they would have had to flee their homes and how many times that their homes were bombed. And in my opinion, this is something that's very important to talk about and recognize because, on one hand, yes, what happened in World War II was a catastrophe and it should not have happened. It's very wrong what was happening to Jewish people, but on the other hand, it's also not right to come into someone's land and take it over and force them to just deal with it, and when they wouldn't deal with it, to start attacking them with bombs, tear gas, uh, murder, ethnic cleansing. That is just not fair. You can't preach that somebody deserves to have somebody who is oh my god, what is that word? Oh, you can't preach that those who are oppressed deserve to have a safe space and then go around and oppress those who are not oppressed and take away their safe space. That's hypocritical, and that's what's happening in Palestine and Israel today and for the last 100 years. I think it hasn't been covered in the media until recently because considering where I live in the US, but I'm an immigrant of the Middle East. I was born in Iraq and I grew up in Iraq and Jordan. And in the Middle East, everybody is very like backing of Palestine. We recognize what's happening as wrong, and everybody's supportive of innocent Palestinian people. But in the U.S. and the U.K., both governments and most Western countries, both governments are very supportive of Israeli forces, and it wouldn't make sense to them to advertise the catastrophes that are happening to innocent Palestinian people if they are the ones causing it. Like without the backing of the U.S., Israeli government and military wouldn't be powerful enough to attack innocent Palestinian families and children the same way that they are today. If you travel to the Middle East or just put on a VPN and look at Middle Eastern news, you will see the conflict shown in a very different way. For the last 100 years, like when I was living in the Middle East, if I turn on the news and I see something about Palestinian people, I will see like there's these ads of Palestinian children starving. Like when you look at the kids, you can literally see their bones or their skin. And the ads are like for 50 cents a day, you can feed this child for life. Or it will be like pretty much asking for donations for Palestinian people and showing what's happening there. Lots of videos of homes getting bombed, of people running away from their homes, asking for donations or asking for people to help Palestinian people resettle into the country that they're living in, like Turkey or Syria or Jordan. I think one of the most important things that we can do, since we are not living in the Middle East and we don't have direct access to Palestinian people, is well, for one, raise awareness and hold our politicians accountable. Um, I get in contact with my representative on a regular basis to express how I feel about certain issues that are relevant to our daily lives and today, like what's happening today. Um, and the people who are supporting Israeli military are our politicians, are our representatives. So it's our duty to tell them how we feel and how we don't support this, because the actions of the US government is supposed to reflect the feelings and the thoughts of the US citizens. And if we disagree with what's happening, then it's our responsibility to let it be known. So raising awareness and contacting our representatives is a great start. Another thing we can do is donate to organizations that will help Palestinian people in their homes right now, like resettle or get access to food, shelter, water, or ones that will help them immigrate outside of Palestine, find new homes, and get back on their feet. For example, the UN and the IOM are both organizations that work together. The IOM is a subunit of the UN, and they are a very great organization to with or donate to that will help Palestinian people resettle out of their countries in a legal way. So um, they will get them over to Western countries like Australia, the US, UK, Canada in a legal way, and they'll help them get back on their feet. They'll get them a home and help them get jobs and help them settle into a Western society to sort of like get a restart on their lives. And I think this is most important for like the children, the Palestinian children who living in Palestine, they might not have a very great future ahead of them, considering the unrest and the war that's happening there today. But if they were to resettle, then they have a chance at living a safer life. And the last thing I think that is most important is making it a daily conversation with our friends. I know in the US at least, a lot of times when I'm talking to someone about an important subject, they'll always be like, oh, I don't like talking about politics. And that's such a cop out. And being neutral on acts of genocide and ethnic cleansing and something like this uh, is just as bad as siding with the oppressor. So making it normal to educate your friends and having everyday conversation is just as important as donating or volunteering or talking to representatives. The most extreme solutions that people are resorting to are murder. That's what we're seeing on both sides as well. Like not just to the Israeli side, also Palestinian. The Palestinians are definitely not saints um, in this topic. They're fighting back as well. They're also doing bombing and like they're also instigating the war, and so are countries in the Middle East that are supporting them. Um, Especially Hamas, which is it's a terrorist organization. Hamas does not represent uh, innocent Palestinian families. Um, that's what's happening though, is that instead of working to find a solution that would work with both sides, is they're resorting to the most extreme solution, which is just straight up murder and bombing and just chaos, instead of sitting down and talking about what's happening and finding a solution, which was the first problem in the first place. Is after World War II, when the UN all sat together and made a decision on what to do without making sure that the people who reside there, who own that land, the Palestinian people, agreed with them, which they didn't, and neither did any of the surrounding countries. And now you have an entire Middle East that is being fought with Israeli military that is backed by the US and the UK and a lot of Western power that is much more powerful than what innocent families and children are could ever fight against. I think it's taking so long for something to be done because history repeats itself, and it's hard for oppressors to recognize that they are doing the oppressing. So if you ask American politicians or Western politicians that are actively supporting the actions of the Israeli military, they will tell you that they are doing the right thing. They will tell you that uh, the Israeli people deserve that land and they are doing the right thing. And those who are suffering and the victims of that colonization and the ethnic cleansing, their voices are not heard because in Palestine, you there's no internet, there's no electricity that's stable, there's no it's the life is very different. A Palestinian person can't just get on Instagram live and talk to hundreds of thousands of people and tell them what's happening and show the Western politicians that what they're doing is wrong. Um, it's also difficult because if they do recognize that what they are supporting is wrong, that when what they voted for in the UN solution is wrong because the Palestinian people did not agree to it, then what can they do? So, what can the US and the UK do now that will make up for their mistakes for the last 100 years? Because their billions of dollars of support to the Israeli people is what has caused this chaos. And if now they recognize that what they're doing is wrong and that they need to pay back the Palestinian people, it's not as easy as saying, okay, we take what we said back. That land belongs to Palestine. Because at this point, the Israeli people, it's been 100 years, so they've they've laid their roots, and I have even my brother and my dad and my sister, they went to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, not now as anymore, but last year, which is when they went, is seen as more of a neutral land, and where they entered the land was from Jordan. So when they entered Israel and Palestine, they entered from the Israeli side, and they said that it was so clean and that it was just organized and Western, and it was easy to know where you're going, and like even the taxi driver like just instantly took them to where they needed to go. They just described where they needed to go and he took them there. They didn't have to give him an address or anything, and they felt very safe. And when they crossed to the Palestinian side, it was not the same at all. There was no structure, no organization. It was not stable at all. It was dirty, not taken care of. There was a lot of rubble, obviously because of the bombings and what has been happening in that land. Um, and so it has just gone for so long that it's not as easy as just, oh, I take it back. Because now you have to find a way to resettle these Israeli citizens that have been living there for hundreds of years, who have laid their roots, who have established uh, a government, an economy, like electricity, like internet, all of that stuff. And you can't, it's wrong to just take that away from them. Even though why they're there and how they got there, in my opinion, is wrong, it's also wrong to just take it away from them the same way that Palestinians had their land taken away from them. So it would take a lot of time and a lot of sitting down and talking about things to solve this. And I think that a lot of Western politicians are not ready to have that conversation yet. Yeah, so the area where Palestine and Israel is has Jerusalem, which is sacred land to both um, the Jewish religion, but also the Muslim religion, and even to Christianity. It's holy land to um, a lot of uh, religions that have one God, and because of that, for the past like 100 years up until recently, Jerusalem was seen as a neutral zone. So both Palestinian and Israeli citizens can enter, and even people who are not from that land can even enter. So my family personally entered with their American passports, and they were let in safely, and it was okay. They didn't need to get a visa. They didn't need to get anything. Um, And because of the conflict, um, Israeli military has been taking it over and claiming it as theirs, which is completely wrong because both sides, so the Palestinian people they're mostly Muslim. If not 90% of them are Muslim, it's a majority of them are Muslim. And Israel, that is mostly all Jewish people. If it's not 99%, I would say it's 98% Jewish. And so that land is sacred to both and in both religions. And it's wrong to for one side to claim it, especially when that side is much more heavily backed by uh, Western powers with not just money but also weapons and supplies and things like that. When the Palestinian people, they deserve access to that land just as much, but they can't fight for it the same way that Israeli people can. And in my opinion, that's completely unfair. And it should be the same that it has been for the past 100 years, where that land is a neutral zone. But conflicts there started when the American Jewish Embassy, or the American Israeli Embassy, was put in Jerusalem. So that's kind of a way for America and Israel to say to the Palestinian people that, oh, this is our land. We own Jerusalem. It's a part of our government. When it's not. It's not either one's. It's a neutral zone, and it should be seen as such. Okay. Oh, so do I just say like, oh, my name is such and such? Do I have to say like my age? Mm-hmm. Okay. Waiting a few seconds. My name is Fatin Almaroof. I was born in Iraq and I spent a lot of my childhood in Jordan. And then in 2010, when I was 9 years old, my family immigrated to the US. Um, my family practices Islam and we keep in touch with our Middle Eastern side. Oh my god, that was so bad. I'm gonna restart. I don't know what I'm saying. I have no idea what I'm saying. Uh, okay. Bro, I think too much. Like my thoughts are so sporadic. It's like I should have written something down before. Yeah, I have no idea. I think at this point in time, after a 100 year conflict, the only solution that there is a one-state solution, which I know a lot of people are saying two-state solution is way better, but what we're seeing now that is happening in the Middle East and in Palestine and Israel is what a two-state solution would look like, which is completely unfair and like much more advantageous to one side, where that one side is um, taking advantage of that and attacking uh, Palestinian people. But if we were to look at a one-state solution, where um, either it would look like both countries would sort of combine and work together and accept each other's existence instead of fighting against it, or um, it would grant the lands that are currently being recognized as Palestine to Palestinian people, and granting Jerusalem to be a neutral zone that does not belong to either Israel or Palestine, and then the lands that is recognized as Israel to be Israel. So each parts of those countries would be actual countries. Like if you were to look at a map, you would see Gaza as Palestine, and the West Bank as Palestine, everything in between as Israel, and then Jerusalem as a neutral zone, a gray area where there's no borders, and everybody from any country is welcome, which is how it should be. I think that's the only way that we could solve things now, but in order to take steps towards that, we have to make it a lot more fair for the Palestinians to establish their own government, because the actions of Israeli government has affected them so much that even if today, right now, the Israeli forces stopped attempting to seize their lands and stopped bombing them and just causing like war and chaos, then they still wouldn't be able to establish their own government, their own economy, a schooling system, clean water and food. Uh, they just wouldn't be able to do that because they don't have the resources to. So, in order to even reach that point, I think there needs to be talk of sharing resources and support to the Palestinians rather than how they could seize their land or attack them more than they already have.
Hello?
Yeah.